Lawyers, public defenders of Reddit, what is the most cringe-worthy case you have ever had to argue? Story 1. I represented a guy who asked Chick-fil-A if they would donate anything as a giveaway for a car show he was running. They agree, and hand him like 300 free chicken sandwich coupons. The thing is, there was no car show. The guy just convinced them there was, and pocketed all the coupons. For those wondering, this is theft by deception. Chick-fil-A is theoretically out like $4 per sandwich. Chick-fil-A doesn't sue, they just tell the cops and they take care of the rest. I didn't handle final disposition, but he'd have gotten probation. Story 2. A client was charged with violating his probation by failing to provide a substance screen. His defense? He tried so hard he had an accident, so it's not like he chose to not give a screen. A 30-some-odd-year-old man testifying to that in court, straight-faced. The district attorney had to duck behind the podium to stop laughing. Comment 1. Well, Your Honor. A tech stands up to testify, Your Honor. We sent him into the room to take the test, and heard all manner of grunting and straining. We told him to drink some water before it, but, well, these things happen. About a minute or two into it, there's this. Do I need to make the sound? Judge nods. Please, tech. Well, it kinda went like brap, but it was very wet. Then he started to curse and exited the room, walking like he had something wet in his pants. District attorney. Something wet in his pants. Defendant. Well, sir, I soiled myself. Judge. Through laughter. Case dismissed. The bathroom's down the hall. Third door to the right. Story 3. I once had to defend a juvenile charged with animal cruelty involving his mom's Pomeranian. Since his mom had caught him in the act, choices of defense were limited. But, since the statute defined animal cruelty as inflicting unnecessary pain or torture on an animal, I argued that the defendant hadn't violated the statute because he had taken measures to avoid hurting the animal, and that if he hadn't, that would have been unnecessary pain or torture. The judge ruled against my client, of course, and nearly locked me up as well, just on general principles. The life of a public defender. Comment 1. Dude, you're there to make sure everybody gets their fair trial, not to try and help every terrible person walk away and continue harming dogs. If people like you didn't try your best to defend someone despite what you may think of them personally, then justice will be biased. It infuriates me slightly that people don't grasp that. Story 4. I have 2 court stories. One's I heard secondhand but still good if you don't mind. The first I heard while at lunch with the state prosecutor and public defender. The case was pretty cut and dry. A guy robbed a bank at gunpoint. The teller gave him the money in a bank bag and pressed the silent alarm. Police showed up quickly, and she gave a description of the guy. Cops were able to catch him not far away. He dropped the bank bag in the pursuit, so they had that against him. They never found the gun, but the teller positively identified him, so whatever. The case was presented in court, and the jury went back to deliberate. It should have taken a very short time, the prosecutor figured, but it wound up being forever. They finally came out and gave a guilty verdict. A prosecutor later found out that the jury deliberation was held up by a single woman who must have seen too much NCIS or something, because she wouldn't shut up about wanting to see the gun as proof. The rest of the jury was ready to vote guilty, but she just would not shut up. Then one of the other female jurors shut her up. Where's the gun? I want to see the gun. He isn't guilty if they don't find a gun. Listen, you woman. You want to know where that gun is? He hid it, so that when you release him on this idiotic pretense, he can come and rob your ass. The woman quickly shut up, and they all voted in favor of guilty. The other case was a paternity case dealing with the child of a teenager. The deoxyribonucleic acid results showed that the child was not that of the girl's current boyfriend, but she insisted that he was the only man she had been intimate with. The judge asked her to really think back to the time in question and consider any time she had been intimate with other men in the room or whatever. The new mother explained that, well, there was one time she and her friend had intimacy with their boyfriends in the same room, but they shared the same condom. What do you mean they shared the same condom? The judge asks. The girl proceeded to explain that they only had one condom at the time, so the friend and her boyfriend had intimacy. And then the same condom was reused by the new mother and her boyfriend. It was quickly ruled that the baby belonged to the friend's boyfriend. Story 5. I studied this case in a law class, and it's hilariously stupid, but it went to the Washington Supreme Court. 5-year-old moved an old lady's chair before she sat in it and she fell over. She sued the 5-year-old for battery. The court found that 5-year-olds can indeed be liable for a tort. Story 6. I represented a condo board that wanted to evict a woman. The condo bylaws allowed for up to 2 cats, provided the board gave permission. This woman had 19 cats, none of which had approval. This woman showed up to court and argued that she shouldn't be evicted since there were only 6 cats. Comment 1. This is how I got my condo so cheap. The woman and 12 cats, max 2 registered, were living in a studio apartment on the top floor of a high-rise condo building. Her argument was that they never left, and if she was willing to live in those conditions with the cats, it couldn't possibly bother anyone else. They evicted her and rented, and condo owners think of the renters as poor scum who squat in their building to give it a few years to air out and wait for the market to turn around so they can refurbish and sell for what it's worth. Those cats ruined the place. I rented as is. Cat fur was embedded in some sort of solid grease dirt that may never come off on the mirrors and windows. I don't even understand what it was or how it happened. Story 7. A client hired an accountant. The accountant did work. The client decided not to pay the accountant. The accountant sent me a demand letter for the full sum plus interest, since their contract stipulated there'd be interest for late payment. I convinced the accountant to settle for the full amount owing under the contract, but no interest. The client didn't pay. The accountant filed a statement of claim and got a summary judgment for the amount owing, interest, and legal fees. I don't act for that client anymore. Story 8. I defended a conversion case, essentially a civil theft allegation, where the parties were fighting over possession of a giant collection of Lord of the Rings memorabilia. Like tens of thousands of dollars worth. I know those books backwards and forwards. I occasionally worked lines into the pleadings. It would have been intolerable not to. My favorite was, oft evil will shall evil mar. Comment 1. A day may come when the value of this collection falls, when we forsake our action figures and break all bonds of insurance. But it is not this day, an hour of juries and shattered dignities, when the prosecution's argument comes crashing down. But it is not this day we fight. By all that you hold dear in this good court, I bid you give this collection to my client. You didn't include many examples, so I added some for you. Comment 2. When I was still in law school, I tried a mock trial in front of a real jury involving a former professional baseball player who badly beat up his neighbor during an argument. It took 3 punches to knock the neighbor out, and the neighbor subsequently died from head trauma. From my opening statement, he swung away. 3 strikes and the victim was out. Story 9. This isn't from the lawyer's point of view, but the defendant's. My dad is an emergency room doctor. He had a patient come in with an eye infection. Since he is not an ophthalmologist, he could not diagnose or treat a disease of the eye. He gave the lady some eye drops to help with the pain and told her to go see an eye doctor as soon as possible to get the infection actually treated. By the way, he sent her home with written instructions too, so the lady goes home and never sees the eye doctor. The infection gets worse. She ends up needing a cornea transplant because she's a complete fool. Then she sues my dad for malpractice and somehow actually won. Luckily my dad's malpractice insurance covered it, but still, the kicker is that malpractice suits in my state have a time limit to file, and hers was filed right before the time limit expired. Because that's how long it took for her to find a lawyer to take the case. Too long, didn't read. A woman ignores doctor's orders. Has to get surgery. Gets money because she's a jerk. Story 10. Another, not me, but my aunt is a civil suits lawyer, and usually everything is settled out of court, so she mostly just does paperwork. But she has had a few cases go to trial, and this is one of her absolute favorites, and one of the dumbest suits I have ever heard. Middle. Aged woman is shopping in her nearby $5 store. She comes to a wall of hanging toilet seats. You know, the really nice toilet seats you buy at a dollar store. She is looking at the toilet seats and proceeds to remove one to further inspect it. Somehow one of the seats just above the seat she removed falls and hits her in the head, so she obviously goes to the nearest attorneys to sue this store for gross negligence. She could have been seriously injured by this falling toilet seat. Details come out, and there was already a sign on the toilet seat wall telling customers to ask for assistance before removing anything. Workers' witness testimony says there is very little chance this woman missed the sign. Honestly, from the details, it sounded like this woman was just looking for some free cash, but my aunt's job is to win the case, no matter how stupid or frivolous. Somehow she got a jury to agree the store was at fault, and the woman won $10,000. The case and arguments got published in a monthly journal on trials, probably because it was just so entertaining. I will try to procure the actual published story if I can. And that's the story of why your local Family Dollar has a glass case around the toilet seats. Comment 1. There are a bunch of legal inconsistencies in this comment. First of all, unless she had $10,000 of real damages, there is no way she won that much. You can't sue for could have been seriously injured. Secondly, gross negligence has a legal definition that this doesn't even come close to meeting. I'm not doubting the truth, but either the store had a truly awful lawyer, this comment is exaggerated, or someone bribed a judge. Story 11. My friend represented the city in a theft case. He was forced to prosecute a one-legged elderly man who took some cans from a curbside recycling container. Don't mess with city property, folks. Comment 1. Wow, that city was savage. Lol. Just curious, would it be legal if he were removing cans from the trash cans instead of the recycling bin? Comment 2. Trash is typically considered abandoned, so there isn't a problem. However, many cities now have ordinances prohibiting trash collecting in an effort to curb dumpster diving. This is typical in cities with large homeless populations. Story 12. Not my client, but I listened to a hilarious plea negotiation for a granny who was busted for driving under the influence. She was like 83 and arrested driving a boat of a caddy. Anyway, negotiations were going well until the prosecutor, who was flipping through pages and pages of this granny's rap sheet, gasped and said, "Oh my goodness, she was tried for attempted harm in 73. Witty barbs were traded. The defense attorney argued the merits of Granny's acquittal. And eventually, the prosecutor offered a reasonable plea, but not until after much speculation about whether Granny did it. Story 13. Not a lawyer but a true story that fits well here. A woman went to Disney, the Magic Kingdom, and stood kicking the castle for about 3 hours. Some cast members observed her behavior and reported it to security. A couple of weeks later, she attempted to sue Disney Parks and Resorts, saying a brick had fallen from the castle and landed on her foot. The castle isn't made out of bricks. End of case. Story 14. Public defender here. Just last week, I had a client who was charged with kicking in somebody's door to steal a kitten. Quite literally, a cat burglar. I chuckled. Story 15. My father is a personal injury attorney. I heard this story from a circle of his friends. A woman, driving at night, ends up running over a drunk person in the middle of the road. It turns out the person was rich. The woman decides to sue his estate for the injuries sustained to her neck when her car went over his body. Edit. I want to say that the victim had previously crashed his car into a ditch. Hence why he was wandering in the road drunk for a bit prior to being run over. Story 16. I had to prosecute a woman in the Tampa Bay area because she had received a citation for not having her cat on a leash while it was outdoors. The poor old lady brought in pictures of her outdoor cat to show how cute it was. I'm not even fully convinced she owned the cat, as all she did to care for it was put some food and water outside by her shed. At that point, I was fully convinced of two things. The first being that my civic duty had been more than satisfied by imposing a fine upon this poor old woman. Also, that Florida was not the place for me, as everyone in the courtroom actually seemed to think getting a fine from this woman was just and worth the taxpayer time wasted to achieve the same. Florida is an interesting place. Story 17. Not me, but I was watching a case where this kid was throwing burning dog feces on his neighbor's porch and running away. The public defender just looked like he couldn't care less, and forced the kid to plead guilty, and got 4 years in a juvenile detention center. Story 18. One time when I was waiting in court for a friend's case of minor in possession, I heard a guy attempt to argue that his substance possession charge should be taken away. The substances were found in a search of his car after he was pulled over for making an illegal turn onto a one-way street that ended up being legal. His argument that the stop was not legal, so the search of his vehicle was done illegally, was denied by the judge because the possession was filed as a separate charge. This meant the search was considered to be done with probable cause unrelated to being pulled over. The judge was a real jerk about it too. He kept repeating, "But you did have substances on you," ignoring every argument the kid said until he said yes, and changed his plea to guilty. Story 19. Everyone seems to be listing the dumbest clients. But the dumbest case implies it's the allegation, not the defendant or the defense. So here goes. Violation of probation. The underlying charges are 3 third-degree felonies, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. Basically, it involved an inappropriate relationship between 2 teenagers that was discovered. Condition: no contact with minors. This condition is too general, was used on an old form for some reason, and has been held to be too broad for over 20 years. The client moves to modify so he can speak with his brothers. Different adoptive family, 1 to 2 years younger, not the same sex as the victim. He texts his brothers in the meantime. The other dad finds out about the texts. He doesn't like the client. He tells the client's probation officer. An affidavit of violation is filed. Week later, there's a hearing on the client's motion to modify. Motion granted. A hearing on the client's violation of probation a month later. Revoked. The judge sentences this 19-year-old kid to 15 years in prison. 3 consecutive 5-year terms. A system is so broken that this is normal. Story 20. Not me, but a friend's dad was a public defender for a substance dealer, and they had a video with audio of the deal going down, yet the guy still wanted to go to court. I have no idea why. Story 21. Not me, but when I lived overseas with the military, I decided to sit in on a trial, because why not? The trial was about a guy who bought TVs on base, which are somewhat cheaper because of no taxes, and used them for a private business of his off base, which was a mixture of an American breakfast restaurant in the morning and a Buffalo Wild Wings in the afternoon and evenings with the trivia and sports games. Anyways, living in East Asia at the time, it was nice to get a slice of home. Apparently, buying stuff on base and using it off base for a profit is counted as black marketing because he was exploiting the advantages of the exchange on-base department store. He ended up being convicted, and the TVs he bought with his own money were confiscated, and the people that took them weren't too gentle with the wiring. The owner eventually had to close the restaurant because the TV gimmick was what really drew in business. A real shame. Story 22. I was at a cattle call plea hearing last Friday. Most of the facts in the cases were pretty standard. Then we get to the winner for the day. A guy is the manager of a pizza place. He goes to the restaurant after hours. He is seen on camera pulling in his car, using a key, entering his individual security code into the alarm system, the last 4 digits of his social security number. Then he uses his personalized code to unlock the safe. He leaves and texts a friend the following: "I just stole $3,000 from the safe at work. Shish, I wouldn't want to show my face in court either." Story 23. While working as a law clerk, I saw a case where a woman had sued her ex-husband for child support. The couple had lived abroad, where the husband had an all-costs-paid, high-salary executive position, and the woman was a stay-at-home mom. The woman cheated on him with the tennis coach. They divorced and she moved back to Sweden. The husband moved back as well and claimed he was unable to pay child support because he was now unemployed, and all his savings, like $1 minus $2 million, had gone to the apartment he bought, a purchase he justified by saying there was no other apartment available. Edit. Another story. A young guy gets charged with jumping a subway turnstile and assaulting an officer who tried to eject him. The case goes to trial, and the public defender says his client is not guilty. In fact, the guard was the aggravator and assaulted his client, who only acted in self-defense. The prosecutor shows the court closed-circuit television footage, which clearly shows the guy jumping the turnstile, fighting the guard, and then kicking him in the groin. The defender, who somehow had missed the existence of the video, asked for a short break and then changed his position. Comment 1: if she needs child support to actually take care of the kid, shouldn't the kid go to the husband, as he's the one she would be taking the money from? Seems like a waste of time and effort, in my opinion, to give the kid and child support to a broke person. Story 24: not a lawyer, but my family self-defended, so it's kind of relevant. My grandparents sold their house. Right on closing day, the buyers called them up and told them they were withholding $30,000 from the sale price because my grandparents had left holes in the walls, from paintings and such, removed trees and plants from the backyard, and removed an entertainment unit, which was specifically listed as not included in the sale documents. It literally wasted 6 months of our lives defending ourselves, gave my grandma an ulcer from the stress, and they lost in the end, and were forced to pay for pain and suffering and whatnots. They literally had zero ground to stand on. We think that they were assuming that most people couldn't afford to be out $25,000 and potential legal fees when they had just bought a new home, but my grandparents were downsizing and not in the mood to be messed with. My grandpa defended himself, and man oh man, he is very intimidating to be questioned by as a grandfather, let alone on a witness stand. Apparently, the wife of the buying couple almost cried when questioned by him. The judge later complimented his legal abilities. Ha ha. The neighbor testified that no plants had been taken, and that the buyers had basically tried to coerce him into not testifying about that. The holes in the walls were incredibly tiny and to be expected, and the wall unit nonsense was just the craziest, being that it was literally listed in the sale as not included. It wasn't built in but looked like it. The sad thing is my grandma literally cleaned the house spotless, like she already has a house clean enough to eat off the floors, and left them a welcome gift basket. They're such incredibly nice people, and 2 jerks decided they could be easily messed with. Story 25 obligatory, not me, but I watched while I clerked for a judge. A substance user shot his substance user friend in a dispute about the latter smoking more than his fair share. The guy who was shot's girlfriend drove him to the emergency room, but she had warrants, so she literally kicked him out of the car and sped off. He only got shot in the arm, so the hospital had him patched up in no time, and he told the cops the whole story while still on strong hospital medication. Flash forward to trial. The men are friends again, and the guy who was shot has written a letter in the most shockingly beautiful cursive stating, "I verily swear that Bob did not shoot me. I don't know who did. Thank you." He also recorded a poor quality cell phone video where he verily swears. Even the guy's defense attorney was convinced the letters were actually more damning than the confession. They didn't even ask their own client questions on the stand, they just allowed him to testify. Which is the ethical way attorneys balance their client's right to testify without supporting perjury. But wouldn't you know it, the jury found him not guilty. Everyone, including the shooter, was visibly shocked. He got to go home scot-free. When the jury was questioned, they were basically like, the other guy verily swore juries. You never know. Comment 1. I guess on the one hand, all the evidence against him was the substance-influenced mumblings of a known substance user, told to a police officer who no doubt failed to even record the conversation. On the other hand, you have the testimony of a man who was shot saying that he was not shot by the defendant. I wouldn't have convicted either. No hard evidence. Just the word of the police officer against the word of the victim. I think recent events have shown how little we should be trusting the word of the police. Story 26 Every time I do an eviction, me. Did you pay the rent, tenant? No, M. Why not, T? X, Y, and Z are wrong with the unit, M. Okay, did you tell the landlord or put anything in writing, T? No, this is mostly because I work in Los Angeles and we have professional tenants. They know I'll never be able to track them down to get payment after I evict them. They also know they can extend their free stay by making the case go to court. Comment 1. I have a friend who was in the process of selling a home and had already moved into his new home. He was going to get settled in the new home and go back to the previous place to do some fixing up before putting it on the market. He found the locks changed and people had moved in. Apparently, there's an obscure New Jersey law that if you become a squatter for more than 30 days, you actually have tenants' rights, and they have to take you to court to evict you. Luckily, it was only 2 weeks, but they had gas, electric, cable, etc. Completely moved in, and were in the process of ripping the kitchen out. This happened almost a year ago, and he's still dealing with it, and can't sell the house yet until it's all fixed. Comment 2: I had this same problem with a tenant. I asked for rent, and he said he had to deduct $2,000 for the roof repairs he had done. The thing is, he never contacted me saying he needed these repairs done, and he didn't even hire a contractor. He did the work himself. Story 27. Not a lawyer, but I took law in high school. We had a field trip one day to the courthouse. It was a total snooze fest until I heard a woman had allegedly assaulted her boyfriend with a frozen pizza. I don't know how that one played out. The lawyers fought it out for a bit, then court was out for lunch. Afterwards, we got to see a federal case. I don't remember what it was, but it was extremely boring. Story 28. A lady was abducted by a stranger at gunpoint from a CVS at 1 a.m., forced to drive 2 counties over, and then sexually assaulted. The client maintained that the encounter was consensual, and that he was just too good-looking to have to force women to have intimacy with him. Story 29. I was in court for a minor trespassing charge when a woman got called up on charges of prostitution. The judge asked her, "Ms. X, are you currently working?" She looked confused and replied, "Oh well, not since you arrested me." The best part is, after court was done, we were all lingering outside. I was smoking a cigarette, and she sauntered over to me and said, "God, I need a smoke. I'd do anything for a cigarette." Story 30. This is only sort of answering the question, but it's my favorite thing that has happened in court, so I'm posting it anyway. I used to work out of a courthouse in Virginia, where attire was taken very seriously, and the wrong attire was seen as a sign of disrespect toward the court. A guy showed up for his case wearing really baggy jean shorts and an oversized t-shirt. We were in a particularly strict courtroom that day, and the judge's head deputy told this young man that he had to leave because he was dressed inappropriately for court. He didn't cause too much of a fuss and stepped out into the hallway. His case got called a few minutes later, and when the judge asked the attorney why the defendant wasn't standing in front of him, the attorney explained that he had been asked to leave the courtroom because of his outfit. The judge looked angry, and the attorney quickly said, "Your Honor, to be fair, he's in front of you on an indecent exposure charge. So he's dressed a lot better than he was at the time of the offense?" The judge did not find this amusing, but the rest of the courtroom totally cracked up. Story 31. A solicitor I did work experience with had a pretty dumb case. Client was prosecuted for using a hidden camera to take inappropriate photos of women. He was let go from his job when a coworker read the entire story in a newspaper and showed his boss, who chose to fire the client, as the company had many female workers who would be uncomfortable working with him. The client even had to move house to a new area because of the publicity. The client then tried to sue his old employer for wrongful termination. Story 32. I charged a defendant with introduction of contraband in a jail. He was arrested on a separate warrant and smuggled meth internally to pass the time behind bars. Deputies located him strung out in his cell, and his excuse was that a group of scary men burst into his cell with the substances and forced him to get high. Cameras easily disproved it. Meth ghost duress defense. Works every time. Story 33. I had a client who was arrested for a misdemeanor charge. When he was at the jail and going through booking, the guards noticed that he was digging in the back of his pants. Long story short, the guards did a strip search and found a large bag of meth hidden deep inside his person. To make it worse, there was a video of guards holding him down while the jail doctor removed the bag. Needless to say, he was charged with possession of methamphetamine. What happened? He decided to claim it wasn't his and that he didn't possess it. Yes, you read that right. This moron actually wanted to argue that he didn't possess that meth, despite the fact that it was hidden inside his person. In fact, he was so adamant about him not possessing it that he decided to testify, against my advice, mind you, and tell the jury that 1, he didn't know it was there, and 2, that he, quote, didn't have anything hidden on my person. The jury deliberated for under 5 minutes. I counted. Guilty verdict edit. Just noticed that the title of this is Lawyers Public Defenders. Is there a difference? I am a real lawyer. Damn it. Story 34. I was on the opposite end. I was being sued by a 65-year-old lady who was drunk at 2 p.m. and hit me at a dead stop going 60 miles per hour. We couldn't prove she had been drinking because her husband, a retired cop, showed up to the scene and convinced the cops not to charge. You can't charge after the fact. We were only going after insurance for medical bills. We all sustained horrible injuries, but one day I found out she's suing me. My lawyer was furious. She showed up to my deposition and demanded she cut in and do hers because I'm a lying woman, and then proceeded to tell my lawyers on video that she doesn't know where I came from, that I could have dropped out of the sky for all she knew, but I cut her off, and she admitted to an unknown amount of wine at a friend's house while on methadone. She was so positive it wasn't her fault that she just admitted everything we had no evidence of. Her lawyer literally facepalmed. Story 35. I helped prosecute a kid who had a habit of stealing stuff from gym locker rooms. The thing is, to get into the locker rooms, he'd fill out an application for the gym in question. But he used his real name and address. Story 36. My favorite client. A 19-year-old kid gets super drunk, walks to a strip club, hands the bouncer his identification, enters the club and immediately breaks into a storage room, grabs a bunch of adult DVDs, and gets grabbed by the bouncer while trying to leave with the DVDs stuck under his shirt. Everything was caught on tape. The kid woke up in the hoosegow with no memory of any of it. Cops had to explain to him that he had been trying to steal low-quality adult DVDs. Instead of just looking that stuff up on Google like a normal person. Story 37. I once had to argue a case in which a server was charged with theft and forgery because they misread a tip line on a credit card receipt. The diner had written in a 0 but had left a tail at the top of the digit that made it look like a 6. The diner also failed to enter in the total at the bottom and left that blank. The $6 was just shy of 10%, so the server made the addition of the $6 to the tab and wrote that in the total line. The diner came back in a few days and raised holy hell with the management, alleging the server was stealing from her. Management apologized profusely and refunded the diner their $6. Still not satisfied, the diner then went to the police. Just like that, a felony and a misdemeanor charge. Comment 1. And before anyone asks, I got written permission from this client to disclose the facts of this case. Not for Reddit, but because the case was so ridiculous that I wanted to bring it up at a bar conference. Story 38. I filled in for another lawyer at my firm for a plea deal. I spent a total of 15 minutes with my client, getting mitigating factors so the judge would accept the deal. All I knew was the guy was being recommended to substance court. As we're all standing before the judge, the solicitor recites the facts of the case. Apparently, my client got high on substances, broke into a neighbor's house, put on his belt, and passed out in his bed. Needless to say, it was hard trying to keep a straight face. Story 39. A typical, not me but disclaimer. I had a high school teacher whose sister-in-law was hit while crossing the street. Legally, at the correct time, etc., completely the driver's fault. The driver tried to sue her for the damage caused when her body impacted their windshield. The case was thrown out. My parents were at the store on a busy holiday, either Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve, and the mirror of my dad's truck scraped across the car next to them as he parked. Months later, the person who was the passenger in that car tried to sue him for a neck injury caused by the accident from my dad's mirror scraping a parked vehicle. It didn't even make it to court. Story 40. I'm way late on this, but it's a good one. I once defended a woman in an eviction case where she, without permission of the landlord, converted the garage of the rental house into a bedroom with a bathroom. The bathroom she created apparently drained into the floor drain typical in garages. I attempted to defend her, but lost spectacularly, at least partially because she failed to show at trial. She was in the county jail for unrelated reasons. Story 41. I hope I'm not too late. I'm also not an attorney. However, I was arrested for boating under the influence. The kicker, I was by myself in a canoe. I have the hilarious, cringe-worthy police report available if anyone is interested. Although it's completely worth the read, it's written in uppercase letters, which annoyed a few users last time I posted it. Story 42. My wife sat on the jury for a case of a couple that sued a local school district. The high school has a building trades program where students build a house with professional help and guidance, and then sell it. The couple, both husband and wife are realtors, buys the house and moves in. 2 years later, the wife goes into the unfinished attic and falls through to the garage, breaking both ankles. The buyers argued that no one told them the attic was unfinished, as in no floor, and wanted $5 million. The jury did not find in their favor. Story 43. Not a dumb case, but I heard a great court story. If arrested in Scotland, the police record what you say in response to the charge. The procurator fiscal, the Crown's prosecutor, then has to read it out verbatim to the judge. Some guy had been arrested multiple times and knew the system, resulting in the judge asking the procurator fiscal the response and receiving the reply, I, the procurator fiscal, am a fool. Story 44. My father-in-law was the fool, a con man in a lawsuit a few years back. His electricity was cut off due to non-payment, so of course he spent what money he did have on Kentucky Deluxe and passed out in the house. It was a really hot summer, and apparently at some point he crawled out the back door for air. We found him, and he was put in the intensive care unit. He filed a suit against the electric company for cutting off his electricity since he is disabled, doesn't like working, never has, and won. He is hands down the dumbest, luckiest criminal I know. Story 45. Not a lawyer. Have to do legal work. A customer filed a lawsuit because a cashier checked his $20 bill for the watermark when the pen was inconclusive. She had been reprimanded for taking a counterfeit bill, so she was being extra cautious. He claimed she caused him embarrassment and questioned his honor or some such nonsense. Part of an acoustical ceiling tile fell but hit no one. Dust, however, fell on a mother and son standing near. They both went to the emergency room, claiming neck and back injuries. They were both discharged with, and believe it or not, no visible signs of injury, compensation-seeking behavior. Both sued. Story 46. Not a lawyer, but was in court for something unrelated and had to sit through someone else's trial. It was a couple, and they had an argument. The girl was talking to other guys on Facebook, and the boyfriend found out. They had a verbal argument, and the guy took the router modem out to the driveway and smashed it to bits. The girl called the cops. He got 1 year probation for destruction of property for destroying what was arguably half his router. Such a nonsense trial. How that went to court is beyond me. Story 47. Not a lawyer, but I was driving and was in a right-hand lane with one car in front of me. The light was red, but it was legal to turn right on red. I wasn't paying attention and saw the traffic clear and took my foot off my brake, not realizing the car in front of me wasn't moving. I tapped her rear bumper, but like a good person I pulled over with her to inspect the damage. There was no damage, and she was really nice about it. We didn't exchange any information and went on our way. A week later, I got a call from a lawyer saying she was suing me for a hit-and-run damage to her car, which for some reason was in the thousands, and that she had neck and back pain. She had taken down my license plate number, apparently without me knowing, and claimed I just drove off IA. Had a witness in the car, a friend, and B. My father was a lawyer. The case was thrown out and she got nothing. Story 48. I interned at a legal aid firm, so a bunch. I did mostly domestic violence work, which is usually sad and not funny, or all that unique, but during client interviews we had to have some interesting questioning quirks. You didn't say, "Were you drinking?" You said, "How many drinks had you had?" Also, I had a woman who wanted an order of protection against her neighbor for harassment. What did he do? Made an obscene gesture when she drove by and sicked his over 30-pound poodle on her 16-year-old son. We didn't take the case. The best was a woman who had raccoons living in her roof, and when the landlord covered the hole, the raccoons took over the yard. My boss wouldn't let me advise her to start paying the raccoons' rent, because it was their property now. Story 49. I actually sat on the jury for this one. Woman, despondent that her husband left her, calls him to announce that she's going to harm herself with an overdose of pills. Her husband calls emergency medical services, races to her apartment, and arrives with the paramedics. They see that the woman is fine. She says she didn't take any pills, she just wanted her husband back. She turns down an offer to go to the hospital. Emergency medical services leaves. The husband stays. A few minutes later, the woman goes into convulsions. She had taken an overdose of pills, but when the husband arrived with emergency medical services, she just wanted to be alone with him, so she lied to them to get them to leave. Her husband calls emergency medical services again. They arrive. The woman dies. The woman's extended family, not the husband, sues the city for not taking her to the hospital. This sounds like a case that shouldn't even have made it to trial, but the city attorney was so incompetent and the family's attorney was so good, i.e., theatrical, that just before the jury was to deliberate, the city made an offer which the family accepted. Disclaimer: if you or someone you know is going through a tough time, please reach out for help. There are resources available, and you don't have to go through it alone. Story 50. I was a juror in this case, but I got to watch the end of it. A guy had been stealing oranges from over a farmer's fence and got caught by the farmer. The farmer confronted the thief and took photos of the thief holding an orange in front of his car's license plate. The farmer called the cops, and the thief drove off with a sack full of stolen fruit while the cops were on the way. They arrested him a couple of days later, because apparently he had been convicted of theft before, and the police didn't feel like they needed to try too hard to crack this case. For some reason that I absolutely cannot fathom, this thing went to trial. I can only assume the public defender on his case couldn't figure out why this went to trial either, because her opening and closing statements each consisted of a single haiku. And her arguments mostly just consisted of bringing up the guy's past convictions and trying to argue that he was basically too dumb to realize that he was stealing, but it was fun to take part in the legal process.